Why is belief the measure for what like determines what happens to your eternal soul?
You were a Christian, right?
Yes.
Do you remember in the Bible it's saying anywhere, prove to everyone that I God exists?
No. No,
Have
it
you
says to
learned
give a
or heard
defense.
in
It
any
says to
religion where their gods
give a
ask them to do that?
defense. No, it says to give a defense for what you believe, but it doesn't
Right.
say to prove it.
Right. And I noticed that a lot of like atheists or ex-Christians or pagans and stuff, they'll ask for that. They'll be like, "Well, where's the proof?"
Yeah.
And that's not something that is taught by God or the other religions because they obviously didn't feel it's necessary. Like you can look to like modern court systems and you'll have someone being acquitted and they've got DNA evidence, they've got witnesses, they've got all this stuff, and they won't convict that person because they're not thoroughly convinced that it's not enough evidence. They're not thoroughly convinced. We'll have people who will go through traumatic like firsthand like things and their brain will convince them it didn't happen. Like proof doesn't substantiate belief. Like
But
we
that's
can
not
have all the proof in the world, but people will still choose not to
But
just
but
because.
do you not agree that that's how we come to determinations about our reality is by not just having like faith in everything, but actually having like verifiable
Oh
evidence? Like
no,
the
I'm one of
reason
those
the
Christians.
reason
I've never seen miracles. I've never had God speak to me. I've never had like crazy dreams. I've not seen any like, well, y'all have a lot. Well, God came to me in a dream and I saw him and I audibly heard. Like I've never had any of that. None of that.
yeah. But I guess what I'm asking is, do you feel that belief is an appropriate measure for morality? Like, do you feel as though somebody's eternal soul should either be punished or rewarded based solely on what they believe, what they think?
If belief was the only thing necessary, yes, I'm not a once saved,
But
always
you
saved
need
person. Like
but
once you
you
believe,
need
you're
that.
saved forever type person.
But you need that in order to in order to be saved, you have to believe. Like, yes, I know you have to do the works and you have to make sure you're being a good person and living by, the love, and I get that. But you said you have to first believe. Like, you believe and then the
That's the
works
first
follow.
step. Yeah.
Right, right, right. So that's part of what makes you saved is the belief. That is a requirement to be saved. And what I'm asking is it fair that in order to be saved, you have to believe? Because if something is unbelievable, if you're not convinced by something, that has nothing to do with morality and it has everything to do with just how your brain works. And so if I'm unconvinced by the evidence of this God, or
Yeah, but see,
Jesus.
belief and faith don't necessarily have to be defined by evidence. Because if you think of like the first century Christians, the apostles went to the churches, they hadn't seen Jesus. Not all of them,
But
they
I
hadn't
think
met Jesus at that point. They believed based on what they heard. It wasn't because they saw Jesus and
But do
they
you
saw
think
all
that
those miracles.
but do you think that just believing what you hear is an appropriate way to come to conclusions about your reality? Like if I just believed whatever everybody told me, wouldn't I just be believing a lot of things that weren't true?
Well, true, depending on who it's coming from, but like if a friend that you trusted, like with your life and your soul, and they didn't gossip about you or talk crap about you, or they were always there for you, and they would die for you, and they said, "Hey, I really think, this is this, and I've heard this, and I believe this with my whole heart. I think you should too. I think you would consider that. Moreover, you're gonna burn in
Well,
hell.
it
By the
depends.
way,
It
you're gonna,
depends on what it is. I mean, it depends on what it is. Because if I have like my husband, I love my husband dearly. I've been with him for about 12 years, and I trust him. I trust everything he says. If my husband came up to me and said, "Hey," speaking of my husband, I just summoned him. Oh, thank you. He just brought me tea. I like summoned him. Like I say my husband, and then he comes out with tea. That's so nice.
what
Thank
type of
you.
tea?
This is refresh. Tazo, refresh.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, so okay, so back to that. If my like I love my husband, but if my husband came up to me and he said, "Hey, I just had an alien abduction. Like an alien just abducted me in the yard and I just went and had like a tea party with a bunch of aliens." I would probably try to like check him into like a psych
This is
hospital.
so
Like,
weird, and you're not gonna believe this.
oh no, no,
He's like,
no.
couldn't you pick something better than that?
No, but but I think the point is that like just because I believe is somebody and I trust someone, it doesn't mean that everything they tell me is true or believable, right? Like we still have to
Right.
like to critically examine the claims being made to make sure that they're true. I could trust you with my life, but you could still have wrong information, right?
True. But that's where
So,
faith comes in. That's tough. You have to sit there and decide if you're
but
going
why
to
would I
put your
have,
whole heart into it, you know?
right?
Like,
And I agree with that. But shouldn't somebody have like sufficient evidence to put their whole heart and faith into something? Like believe
I would
somebody.
say from like a different perspective, yes, but from the life that I've experienced, my life is like, it's not like, I'm like, I have like a really crappy life. So I won't look
Right.
at my life and be like, yeah, man, look at all this great, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I lost my train of thought. My dog just came in and farted really, it
That's
smells
okay.
so bad.
I happen to
Oh,
me all the time.
he's like 10 years old, and like since he's gotten older, like the farts are like,
No,
whoa.
I know it. I know that
But
life.
like my life has sucked so bad. It's not like I believe in God because he's done so many amazing things in my life and I'm like, yeah, he's done good things for me. My life still sucks even though I'm a Christian. I still have
Yeah.
really crap things that happen, but I have faith regardless.
Yeah, but what I'm asking is what is the reason that you have to have that faith? Like what
It's not
convinces
evidence.
you? But
It's
what
not
is it?
evidence.
Because why okay, so why do you have faith in this specific God in Jesus, but you don't have faith in the thousands of other God claims?
Well, I grew
Why
up
is that
overseas until I
specifically?
graduated from high school. I lived overseas till I was
Okay.
18, so I lived in Buddhist countries and Muslim countries. So I
Okay.
already grew up knowing
You've been
all of those. I
exposed to all
wasn't
that.
raised in
Yeah.
a indoctrinated white American Christian household.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, so I had no beliefs really. And then I came to America, went to college. I was like, woohoo, I'm gonna lose my mind. And then got married to someone. And then after being treated so badly, I just wanted to find something that to me like made me feel like I mattered. Something was important. And then when I learned that Jesus died for our sins and you know, we needed that assistance, we needed that help because we all fall short. None of us could be perfect because we all have barriers and things that we struggle with and different things. That's the only religion where the claim is that the God sent someone to do something for us, where all the others are just sitting there like, hey, if you do all this for me, maybe you can come to my heaven. It's
I
like,
mean, yeah, but
I'm not competent. Like, I'm not competent.
yeah, I think that's great. I think that's nice, but it kind of seems like you came to it like through like emotional reasons, which is not it's not a bad thing or a wrong reason, but it doesn't seem like you were given like a evidence for why you should believe that. It seems like it made you feel really good and it accepted you and you liked the system, so you went with it, which I can appreciate. I can 100% appreciate that and respect it. But is that a good reason for me to believe it?
I don't believe you can want to believe it, even if people gave you concrete evidence, because that's a you decision. You know what I mean?
Well, but I would believe it if people gave me concrete evidence. But because I don't have concrete evidence, to me, there's just as much evidence for your God as there is for all the other gods that people believe in. They have their holy text, they have their history, they have, their personal experiences with their God. And so if you're telling me that this God is real, they're telling me that this God is real, and you both have the same amount of evidence, how am I supposed to come to a rational conclusion about which God to have faith in? And why should my eternal soul depend on me getting it right if there's
Have you
not
studied
sufficient
all of
evidence?
them?
Have I
Like, have
studied
you,
every
like,
religion? No, that would be
like,
impossible.
well, I mean, if you historically study your long-term ones, like Muslim, Islam, Buddhism,
Yeah, but
your
how do we know
long-term
that
ones,
there's not some like indigenous spirituality that neither of us know about it in some remote part of the world, that they're the only ones that have gotten it right, but I just don't know about it.
I mean, that would be like you could try to think of like extra things out there, like maybe Hawaii made some religion we don't know about and it's
Right.
isolated because they're on an island, but
And maybe that's the one true
it comes
religion,
down
but
to
you and I
faith.
would never know about it.
You can study all the main ones that are historically, and you can compare their texts and see what they teach.
But
You can actually find similarities.
well, yeah, of course, but how am I supposed to come to the conclusion about which one is the true one is what I'm trying to ask. Like
I don't have a
how
good
do I
answer
come
for
to
that.
that?
I fully think that depends on the
Yeah.
person and their want to, if they're doing it because that's what they ultimately want. They want ultimate truth, or they kind of identify with it, kind of like you said, or it's like a feeling experience. It
Yeah,
truly depends on the
it's
person
very
and where they
subjective,
are in
right?
their mind.
Like it's very subjective, right?
To each person, yes, I believe
Yeah.
so.
So if it is so subjective, why is my eternal soul depending upon it? Like
I
it's
the
not like my eternal soul depends on if I believe 2 plus 2 equals 4, because we can
right.
empirically, like, we can prove that 2 plus 2 equals 4. We can like look at the math and we could do the math and show that that's true, that 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? Within the system
Yeah.
that we're in. And so that is that we can prove that. But we can't prove God the same way. And I would think that if my eternal soul rests on me believing it, then I should be able to prove it like I can prove 2 plus 2 is 4.
So I can give you an analogy. I can't really give you a scripture of,
Okay.
we'll say
I prefer
Christianity is
analogies
the
over
only
scripture anyway.
religion. It may not be the best one, but sometimes my brain does it better. We'll
That's
say
okay.
Christianity is the only religion,
Okay.
and God was nice enough to give us the directions. We just
Okay.
chose not to follow him. It's still fair versus God created the world. He has these standards. He just threw us out there, didn't teach us anything, and we just show up there on
But
Judgment Day,
he,
and he's like, "Oh yeah, you did all this stuff wrong," but he didn't even tell us what the standard was. Then that would
but
be
that's kind of
totally
what he did.
unfair.
But that's kind of what he did, because what he did is he threw us on earth. He gave us a religion we had to believe on based on faith and no evidence alone, and then confused us with allowing all these other religions to develop that have just as much evidence, and then gave us brains that use critical thinking, critical thought, rationality to come to conclusions about our reality, and then expects us not to use that same rationality to come to conclusions about what should be done with our eternal
I mean,
soul.
we should. I mean, you think about the bad church experience you had, right? I'm a religious trauma. I've been through religious trauma. I'm sure some people in your context have. They know biblically that stuff was not taught by Jesus, right? So you had people who clearly didn't do it wrong. They weren't following the rules. They just did what they wanted to do, and they manipulated their environment. So they clearly weren't doing what the Bible asked. And if they had, you probably wouldn't have had to suffer from whatever that was. I had a choir director take advantage of me when I was a teenager, and he knew I had a poor home life, and he was like 20 years older than me and tried to be that cool guy.
Sorry to hear that.
He clearly wasn't doing what Jesus commanded. I wasn't a Christian then. I had no idea what the Bible said. I went because my grandma made me. like but like they're clearly not doing what was said, right? So that would be like, well, he did kind of give us some he said, here, this is all you have to do. So that
But
part's fair versus
but
I'm
yeah,
just not going to tell
but
you what
how
to do
do
and you can just figure it out on your
but
own.
how do we know that he said that that's what you're supposed to do? Because we're only getting this from a Bible, which is a very flawed book that was written a long time ago that we don't have original copies of, that has been changed and altered and translated
They
over
still
time.
have the scrolls that they
We
do, and then
but
you have people who
we don't
translate it,
have
but they
any
translate differently,
we
like
have
they'll do
no
it from.
originals though. We don't have originals of like any of the New Testament manuscripts. Like all we have are copies. We have like the largest, if I'm not mistaken, the largest size original manuscript that we have of any New Testament writings is about the size of a credit card. So we don't actually have any original writings. We only have copies that were made of those writings many generations down the line. To me, it doesn't feel like a reliable source for truth. That seems like a man-made book that I should be looking at critically. I should be examining this critically. And if I were to examine it critically, and then I were to look at all the other religions and their texts, then I would see that they all have their own texts that were written in ancient times, but there's no way to determine that these are true. These are actually the divine word of God. We just have people telling us that they are.
You
So
really
you can,
battle all that stuff, don't you? Like try to analyze what would be what, or like what if I had
I
done
don't,
this, or like all of
I
these
don't, I
different
don't,
things and how to.
what do you mean? Like I battle what?
Just like all the things that you're thinking about and you're telling me, well, like, well, what about this and what about this and
Well,
what if it had been
yeah,
like
of
this? You think
course.
about
I'm
that
a
stuff.
thinker. I'm a thinker. I think about this stuff. I am not the type of person that can just have blind faith and believe something. I need like concrete evidence to believe something, and I think that's just reasonable, because we do that for all other things in our lives. Like like people like to say that like when I get in a car, I'm using faith that I'm not going to get in an accident, except for I don't know that I'm not going to get in an accident. And the reason I use my car is because I have verifiable evidence that cars typically tend to work and get us where we're going, right? So I have evidence that suggests that it's probably okay to get in a car. However, I still might get in an accident. It still
You
might break
can't
down. I could
control the
lose a wheel.
18-wheelers, eh?
Right, yeah, I can't control it. Right. I don't know for a fact. So I'm not going to dedicate my life to believing that my car will always get me from point A to point B because I don't really know that. I don't. Even though I have more evidence to believe that cars do get us from point A to point B than I have for Jesus. So if I'm approaching my reality, if everything I approach in life is through evidence and reason and critical thought, why should I have to just of that process in order to have faith in what like you or someone else is telling me about God? And there's lots of people that would get on this chat and they would say that you're wrong about God and that you've got it all wrong and you're going to be punished at the end of your life because you've got it wrong and I should listen to them. So if I have you here and them here and you're both telling me this is God, this is God, this is how you're saved, this is how you're saved, and you're both conflicting, how am I supposed to know that I've got it right?
Well, I
How am I
wouldn't
supposed
tell
to
you,
make
hey,
a
by the way, you're
choice?
going to suffer eternal punishment if you don't believe what I'm
Yeah, I
saying.
can
That was
appreciate
never
that.
taught.
No,
There's Christians
no, I
that
can
do
appreciate
do
that.
that. Just like the ones that
Yeah,
come and tell you, well, you were never really a Christian anyway.
yeah,
You're never really saved. Like, I'm sure that's annoying as hell. They're not doing it
yeah.
right either. God never told us to do that. So
I can appreciate
I
that.
automatically in my mind would disqualify them because they're clearly not even doing what they claim to be following. In my
But
mind, don't even
but they
listen.
would disqualify you too, and they have their reasons, they have their scriptures, and I think that's the problem is that every denomination, every religion, every belief, they all have their experiences, their history, their text to back up what they're saying and what they believe. But at the end of the day, it's all subjective and each person has to just kind of take it on faith. And I just don't think that something you take on faith should determine what happens to your eternal soul. I don't find that to be a fair system. I think it should depend on maybe how you were as a person, how you acted, how you behaved, your intentions. But I don't think that what you believe or what you think or what you're convinced by should play a role in determining where your eternal soul goes if we're talking about a fair and just system.
I understand where you're coming from. I
Yeah.
do.
And I understand where you're coming from too. And I can totally appreciate that, you're not, that you're willing to say, I don't know. Like there's things I
Oh
don't know.
yeah,
And
I shoot. If I don't know, I don't know. I'm not going to sit there and lie. Like if I don't know, I don't know. I have no problem. I know a lot of Christians will be all like, "You should have the answer to." We don't have the answers to everything.
yeah,
We're not. I'm not a genius. Like I know what I know. I'll tell you everything I know about specific topics if you ask me. I could tell you a lot of things about the New Testament. You could hit me with the Old Testament. I could be like, I probably haven't studied that as much as some people. Like I
yeah,
don't. You know what I'm saying? Like
yeah,
but I can be transparent. I'm not going to beat myself up about it. I don't know. I'll go work on it now that you've been like, hey, if you point this out, I'll go look into it and figure out where I was
yeah.
falling short to try to do better.
I think that's great. I mean, I think that's the way to be. I mean, you and we're going to come to different conclusions. I always say, like, it would be so boring if we all just, like, agreed with one another and believed the same things. Like, it's interesting to have these conversations and to bounce off of one another. And I mean, I can definitely appreciate, respect what you think. And at the end of the day, I think I'm just unconvinced of why your specific belief is the right one or the way to go. And that I could be wrong. If I were to go that way, I could be wrong and I could go to another God's hell. And so when looking at it that way, I think the most reasonable, rational thing I could do is just kind of reserve my belief until it takes a little bit more than faith to believe it, you know?